Welcome everybody to another U2 Concast. Thanks for joining us today. We're very excited to present a new book, U2 Songs of Trauma and Hope Between the Midnight and the Dawning. And we have our authors with us, Ingunn Røysland and Charles Armstrong. It's a very exciting day. We're launching this book officially, perhaps virtually in the United States through the U2 conference channel right here. But we're thankful that we can have the authors here from Norway. And I thought maybe they could introduce themselves a little bit and tell us about their interest in U2 and their academic background and how this book came about. Ingunn, could you start us off?
Yeah, so I'm Ingunn, yes, and I've been a U2 fan for about 4 decades, and I remember Gloria hitting me hard in the beginning of the 1980s, and I've been a fan ever since. Yeah, but this is the first academic thing I'm doing on U2. I've been listening for many years to the music and always taken the deeper interest in the lyrics as well. And in the band's history, and Bono especially inspires me with his background and his battling with grief and things like that. It's always been yeah, he's been inspiring me, and so that's my background in that sense. But and I've studied English and submitted my master's thesis on U2 and the troubles and trauma in 2020. But I don't work like at a university or anything. I'm a high school teacher at a high school specializing in cross-country skiing and snowboarding and free skiing and stuff like that. So I used to teach English, but for now I'm just teaching German. I also love German a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. I love how you've included your interest in U2 in your academic work. And I know your academic work's quite important, and it's very valuable to us in the field of U2 studies. But I know you're a fan also, so fandom and the academia came together for you very well. Charles, I understand you've studied quite a bit in Anglophone literature, and you're a professor of English at the University of Agder.
That's right, professor of English. In terms of academic background, I guess I started off as a romanticist, but then I drifted towards Irish literature with an emphasis on Irish poetry. My main interests there have been Yeats's poetry on the one hand, on the other hand, Troubles poetry, and through reading poets like Seamus Heaney, Michael Longley, Derek Mahan, I got into also the cultural side of the Troubles and into trauma theory. And if you like, that's basically how I met Ingunn. I gave a course on trauma and literature, where I think Sunday Bloody Sunday was on the curriculum, basically. So we got a connection there. Just a word on my background. Otherwise, I'm second generation immigrant to Norway. I have parents from Ireland, and my father grew up in the north of Dublin in Phibsborough, so not far away from basic U2 country, if you like. And when I grew up in the north of Norway, my dad was a physicist working on northern lights, which are very visible up in the north of Norway. And if you like, when I was a teenager, U2 were a big part of my identity, basically, as an Irish person abroad. So particularly around Unforgettable Fire, Joshua Tree, that's when it was particularly intense. But I've enjoyed revisiting them now and again, and it's been great with Ingunn's project to do so even more thoroughly.
Thank you. Very fascinating how the two of you found each other and had similar interests in trauma theory and traumatic experiences, but also in art. It sounds like there's a connection there through literature and poetry and music, how art is helpful for these times of suffering. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you conceived of the project? And now we have this wonderful book. So how did the book come about, and what was that journey all about?
Yeah. Do you want me to start there?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm doing a couple.
Magical journey, as I like to call it. it's a magical journey. It started out, you know, I was not quite really young when I started studying with the master's thesis program. I did like a comeback after having 5 children, and then I read about this course EN 436. It's like I really was very interested. It was titled Literature and Political Trauma, and I was looking at, yeah, it was based on Northern Ireland, and at some point, yeah, I just thought to myself, I need to take this course. It was looked very interesting, and then luckily I met Charlie. He lectured on that, and as he mentioned, Sunday Bloody Sunday was on the curriculum, and I couldn't be happier. So I just, you know, asked him very early on if I could do a presentation on that song. We had to do an oral presentation, and I really wanted to do a presentation on that, and I was allowed to do it. And in July 2019, I started writing the master's thesis. I was actually a bit surprised that I could actually write about U2 and trauma and the troubles. So that was an amazing journey, and with Charlie as the best supervisor I could ever have. And it was very interesting, and I learned a lot. And 1 year after I submitted the thesis, and I thought to myself, this couldn't be it. I mean, it was a good thing to submit it, but I mean, I just loved what we were doing. So I thought, this can't be the end of it. And luckily, at some point, to cut a long story short, the Rock and Roll Museum in Dublin, they shared my master's thesis on their social media. And some months later, or even almost a year later, Scott, you discovered it, and you sent me a text message. And that's where it all, you know, started. You even suggested that it might turn into a book, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was amazing. And I also did some projects on Achtung Baby for the U2 conference, and I'm so happy I was asked to do that, because that's also then part of the book with this trauma and hope perspective. So it's been going on for many years, and it's kind of a baby there. So I really love it. And Charles, he was my supervisor, yeah, for the master's thesis, and afterwards he kindly, you know, helped me along with Achtung Baby and other things, and we've had a really great time working on the manuscripts. I like to you know, look at it upon as a needing what's it called, a bun stow or whatever, adding raisins, cardamoms, and whatever it takes to you know, improve it and work on it. And it's been really a magical journey. And when I started out writing the master's thesis, I never imagined sitting here today. but I love it. Yeah, so I'm so grateful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Charles, could you say a few words about how you understand U2 to be a voice in trauma studies, and why this, from your perspective, was a appropriate direction to follow academically?
Oh, that's a big question.
Sorry, that might have been a surprise question, but I know you're ready for it.
Yeah, well, you know, the place we started, and Ingunn started, was with Bloody Sunday, which I think is a pretty obvious text, which is you know, very much a very early attempt, even if it's a while after the incident up in Derry, an early attempt to start to think about peace and think about healing the traumatic wounds, and of course, Ingunn started there and moved on, and you know, when you start tracing that history, that they've had a colossal role. For instance, I think you're going to come back to the 1998 peace concert, for instance, which was a real flashpoint. But one of the things that I was looking at in my part too was of course that it's not just Northern Ireland. It's interesting to discuss how different conflicts and different situations and contexts have played into their career, have played out in their career. I think probably Northern Ireland is the most important context, which they've kind of taken their experiences from that onto other conflicts and other major issues they've addressed. But it's certainly not the only one. So that's one of the things that I've been looking at in my little contribution. I've just written one chapter while Ingunn's written the rest of the book.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's nice to have the book out. I'm sure being published and having that journey to this point complete that's a milestone, and we're thankful that the book exists. But we're looking forward to reading it. But you both lived it, studied it, wrote it, and I'm sure you've learned a few things along the way. Could you share a little bit about what the process was like working in U2 studies, right? Is I think a field important to all of us. But probably a lot of us fans, know a little bit when we come into it, but we learn a lot more along the way. So what was surprising for you as you worked through the book? Ingunn, what did you discover?
I discovered that U2 had a lot of trouble songs. I didn't know about that when I started. I was thinking Sunday Bloody Sunday, and that might be it. But I learned that they address the troubles in many, many songs. And that was very interesting. And I also was taken aback by all the traumatic evidence embedded into the lyrics regarding the troubles, but also other things like I was applying this theory by sampling the allegorical veils that you can explore a song on different layers. So when I started out, or we started out, and Charles admitted it not last week, that he didn't think it was gonna go in that direction either, because I was writing about political allegory, but then all of a sudden also about romantic allegory and religious allegory. So that was really a surprise. I didn't think I was going to write things like that at all, but I really liked it and found it very interesting. And also the fact about trauma again, that it shows that it's hard to rid oneself of trauma. It's this belatedness to trauma. And in the song Raised by Wolves, written in, I think, 2014, they also address traumatic incidents, the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. And it's really, and also in a song, Cedarwood Road, where Bono and U2 address like the fear also while living there, maybe hypervigilance, and the feeling that you're still standing. I'm still standing on that street, one line goes. And that was new to me. I've never studied any trauma theory before, but I found it very interesting, and I think I learned a lot through this process. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Charles?
Yeah, I've learned a lot too. With regard to, if you like, the U2 literature, I've been so grateful just to borrow books from Ingunn, because she's got the library and I've just borrowed her books. I guess one of the things that I really enjoyed about the project was already in Ingunn's work, and already I done a little article on Bloody Sunday before too, and just the history of that song, how they kind of repurposed it, say after the Oma bombing. They present it differently in concerts. This is something really fascinating, I think. And it wouldn't be possible if they didn't keep going for so long. It's the old myth was that rock and roll stars should stop when they're 30, and get out while they're young. Yeah. And you can always question this, should you have stopped? But I think one of the fascinating things with U2 is that they're repurposing and redoing the songs in subsequent tours. So when I, you know, in addition to Ingunn's excellent library, I went in and I had so much fun just going on YouTube, you know, checking out all the wonderful resources available there from different tours, different concerts. I'm particularly struck by a song like "Where the Streets Have No Name," which has such a complex history. You know, Bono started scribbling on it in Ethiopia. Later, he starts linking it up. Possibly, you know, I actually went back and saw, after I'd written my chapter, I went back and saw the Wim Wenders film, what's it called? The Paris, Texas. And it's actually striking. There's a striking passage there where Harry Dean Stanton is talking about walking out into the desert. And the language is actually quite evocative of the lyrics of Where the Streets Have No Name. So that's possibly another source. And then, of course, you know, with Joshua Tree, they were bringing in the American landscape. And then in later tours, they started putting an African spin on it again. It's, you know, it's just such a complex journey, each song. And I think that's been one of the fun and fascinating things to work with in this project.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks. But I know there's a slide here I want to switch to right now, because I think this would be helpful for maybe Ingunn. You could tell us a little bit about what a reader will discover in the book, who, you know, and Charles too, I'd like to hear from both of you about, you know, for those of us who are not maybe in a Northern Ireland context or historically weren't, you know, contemporaries, but many of us met, you know, I think that might include everybody right here in some ways, with what U2 was living through at the moment. What does the book have for a reader now? And what would we discover in these chapters that might be, you know, relevant for our stories and our journeys?
Yeah. So the first 3 chapters of the book, they are in a way based on the master's thesis and address the troubles. So the first chapter is on Sunday, Bloody Sunday. As you can see there, chapter 1, how long must we sing this song? And we look at a lot of dimensions of the song, talking about the meaning of the song, applying a theory from Hirsch on meaning versus significance, as Charlie talked a little bit about. And there's a lot of things there, history and analysis and things like that. And in chapter 2, we move on to political allegories in the 1990s, going back to the, for example, the Yes concert in Belfast in 1998, prior to the referendum, campaigning for a yes vote in that for the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process in Ireland. And in the 3rd chapter, it has to do with traumatic conflicts and healing confessions. Like, a heart that is broken is a heart that is open. It deals with U2 and the members themselves and how their experiences regarding the troubles. They were not like first victims or anything, but they had a friend who witnessed a bomb going off during this Dublin and Monaghan bombing in 1974, and he was very traumatized by that, and it affected the band as well. And so things like that, a more personal take, so to say, on their experiences with that. Even though they were living in the South, they reacted to what was happening in the North. And then in a way there is a shift in the book, still looking at trauma and hope, but chapter 4 then addresses Achtung Baby, some relevant songs on that album, exploring really and searching for the light of hope amid the darkness of trauma. And there are many things here, and we apply especially romantic and religious allegory in that chapter. And if you look for glimmers of hope, there might be something to be found there, I hope. And in chapter 5, Charles' brilliant chapters, a birthday present, a Christmas gift, and whatever it is, I'm so grateful he wrote it, has to do with multi-directional memory, and he's the expert on that, so I'll leave it to him to say a little bit about it. But in chapter 6, we explore then again this trauma perspective, but linked to music. Is there a possible link here? Could music, and specifically here then U2 music, be a medication against trauma? And conducted a little discourse analysis, like just looking at what fans had said about the songs we address and things like that. And yes, one might say there are tendencies that, if not healing, at least music might help process and cope with traumatic wounds and things like that.
Hmm.
I don't know, Charlie, if you would say more about chapter 5. It's brilliant. So
Too kind, Ingunn.
yeah.
I can say a couple of words. So multi-directional, if you like, trauma studies is actually part of an even bigger field called memory studies. And one of the most influential work in that area recently has been done by an American called Michael Rothberg, who has a book on multi-directional memory, who looked at the Algerian conflict in how it kind of played out in France in the 1950s and 60s, and how, if you like, when that was happening, they were remembering back to World War II, and World War II was kind of a context. So while they were remembering or creating new memories around the Algerian conflict, they were actually remembering back at World War II at the same time. And a lot of memory of traumatic events happens that way. You compare to other things. You know, the cliche and much debated one would be the Holocaust, how it comes up as a point of comparison, which is either, you know, seen as taboo or at the other extreme as a kind of political weapon. But I was interested to see then that in U2 also you can find this kind of layering. World War II, really fascinating context for them. Say the peace conference, when Bono holds up the hands of Hume and Trimble, he's actually echoing a famous picture of Bob Marley holding two Jamaican politicians' hands up. These kind of echoes are quite fascinating. Sometimes they're intended, and Bono, you know, has learned a lot from figures like Bob Marley and John Lennon in his peace efforts. Sometimes they're a little bit more subtle, and you can just find them between the lines. One thing I looked at there too was at places, fascinated by you know, them going to Berlin to record Achtung Baby, and just how much memory was being processed there. They were in a way echoing the films of Wim Wenders. They were echoing some of their heroes like David Bowie, Lou Reed and others who'd recorded at the Hansa Studios, and they were obviously also very conscious of World War II as a recent context. And I threw in new media just into the mix in that chapter too, because it does play a role too. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I think we have. Well, I sorry to go maybe a little out of order. We go there, but yeah, there's the photo, right, of that you're referencing there. But would you like, Ingunn, would you like to say a little bit about this concept here right now with St. John the Cross?
Yeah, and then I can go back to one afterwards, because I will give an example of how we worked. I'll give an example of with one, but yeah, for sure. Achtung Baby here, and then the picture or the photos of Bono and St. John of the Cross. I mean, what could they possibly have in common? I mean, the Spanish monk, he was born 418 years before Bono. And when Charlie gave me that, like, let's say, ingredient, I was thinking, what is this? But I went back to it and looked into it, and I really loved what I found, and I love the ingredient, because what do they have in common? It has so much to do with trauma and hope. This concept of the darkness as being in fact a guide. So the wisdom of the darkness. I'm sure many of you know that St. John of the Cross, he has written the famous poem, Dark Night of the Soul. And in, I think it's the 5th stanza, it goes, "O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn." And I find that really fascinating. And how could darkness be a guide? And many hundred years later, Bono and U2 addressed some of this in their song "The Blackout" on Songs of Experience in 2017. And some of the lines goes, "When the lights go out and you throw yourself about in the darkness where you learn to see." And I really love that. I mean, like, most of us would hate to be in the darkness, but some might say from experience that also in the dark you learn to see important things. And that is what I love about Bono and St. John of the Cross. And on Achtung Baby, we found a lot of trauma and also a lot of hope. So I'm so inspired by that album. I didn't like it in the 1990s. I thought, wow, this is not the U2 I'm used to from the 1980s. What happened? The musical sound and everything. But when I got back to it now, I really like it, both with regards to music, but not the least also with the lyrics. I find that they're deep. I find that they are inspiring, and the glimmers of hope I can see there. So that's, yeah, that's what I would say about that, and can also give an example of one, but that's another story. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to just keep going in that direction, please?
Yeah, so I mentioned the allegorical veils and thambling and this interesting aspect of, interpreting a lyric on different layers. So in the iconic song One, it's also part of the Achtung Baby album. It was a song written at a time when the band didn't really feel like one, because they were heading in different directions, musically speaking. And the song One I have read about came then at a time when they really needed it. It came as a gift in the Hansaton studios in Berlin. This sense that we're one, but we're not the same. And I think it can be applied politically. Charlie mentioned about the Yes concert, and here is a photo of Bono and the politicians there. Trimble to the left and Hume to the right. And this notion that even though there are divisions between, let's say, unionists, mostly Protestants, and then the nationalists, mostly Catholics, they could or are in some ways one. They live in Northern Ireland, they're Irish, you could say Northern Irish. And so this sense of political allegory in here, but also then what surprised me, that there is also this layer of romantic allegory. And at some other point in the lyrics, it says that you asked me to enter, but then you made me crawl. So when I'm talking about romantic allegory, it's not the sense of like a good, warm, nourishing love. It's more of abusive love, this belittlement, being held down. So I found that interesting as well. And I also find we can apply religious allegory here with the same lines, actually. We're one, but we're not the same. And also it says, at some point one sisters, brothers, one life, but we're one. We're not the same, but we're one. So in a way, an encouragement maybe to transcend, to unite in a way in Christ. So I find that is very interesting. Yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, this album, 33 years later now. Well, there's an interesting number for us. Yeah, Charles, to your earlier point, I think about, how U2 themselves repurpose and reframe and kind of continue to present their art in very interesting ways that I think that's only made possible, in my sense of, when there's complexity in the art. So how complex that album was, then, so that it can still be so fruitful now. It's fascinating. I love how you're both pulling out these deep meanings and deep thoughts from something that at the time, I think, and you said, like, when it came out, and many of us remember that, right, about it. It just was such a spectacle, and it seemed extremely, glitz and sex and lights and everything. It was overpowering, as far as new media even, right? I mean, it was just so overwhelming with all these distractions and tasty little bits of entertainment. Yet, underneath all that was this enduring, complex work of art. So thank you. I appreciate how you're still bringing that out for us today. Yeah. I wondered, could we turn to some questions? If our guests have any questions for the authors, please there's just a couple of us here on the call. So I think if you want to unmute yourself and just ask your question, that should work rather well. If you're more comfortable typing it into the chat, that's fine. I'd be happy to read them off, or we could all read them. But would anybody like to respond to this or ask any questions of the authors?
I have a question. I'm wondering how, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm wondering how in the book, perhaps, the personal bled with the political. I mean, out to maybe in pretty much almost all the work, to me, seems to be almost the band putting either the political into the personal or the personal into the political. And of course, with the Troubles, you have the religious trauma and the political trauma almost side by side. And I was just wondering how the book addressed how those two things often bled together, at least in my mind.
Yeah. Well, what can I say? I think, it's fascinating how they mix it and blend it together. I'm not sure if I got the question right. I think what's interesting is that they apply it in so many different areas, the significances, and that they, in a way, it's the band itself that does that. It's not just the audience listening to it. So in many contexts, it's been used. So I really like how they mix these things. That was surprising to me, as I mentioned in the beginning, because I was thinking I'm just dealing with political issues here. It's nothing else. But then there was the kind of personal things, and of course they bring into the songs some of their own personal history as well, I think. So I find it very interesting. I don't know, Charlie, if you can help me out with answering this, because
well, what can I say? I think in some ways, the coexistence of different levels, this is something that popular music has taken from poetry. It goes back to, say, French symbolism at the end of the 19th century. I'm going to be very academic and professorial here, but poets like Mallarmé and Verlaine and Rimbaud, they did this. They had several layers, and you could read a poem in several ways at once. And part of their skill was to get the different layers to match each other in a way, and to create that sense of depth. On the other hand, while you two are doing this, I do also think, it's what fascinates me, and as I mentioned before, is that it's also something that changes over time, that the emphasis changes over time, and perhaps sometimes it's hard to know because sometimes we just have their accounts several years later, but sometimes it appears that it gradually dawns upon them that this song actually has this other level. Certainly they place more stress on it at a later time. Sometimes, it's also packaging. I think, Ingunn, we've discussed the song Please, and the song Please, it'd be really easy just to listen to it as a kind of rather bitter love song or a song to a neighbor or something. But, they put the politicians on the cover of the single, and in the video they had marching boys and everything, which seemed to intimate a political context. So there, the lyrics mightn't seem to invite a political reading, but the packaging, the video certainly did. And I think, the emphasis and the way it plays out is different for every song, basically. I hope that answered your question, Megan.
Thank you. Yeah, Pat, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. For the last few years, doing some reading, some books here and there, when I hear Bono say at the end of a show, "Thanks for giving us a great life," I've read some people talk about that, and well, yeah, because of the price of tickets and blah 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 blah, but you're rolling in the money. But the way that I see it is, I remember what Bono said. He said that when his mother died, he was birthed as an artist. And when he says, "Thank you for giving us a great life," in my heart, I hear that as perhaps he sees, and I feel that we're now I forgot the name of the phrase, but it's holding space for someone. I think that's what it is, in their grief, and you hold space for them in that you witness their grief and their pain. And one thing I admire about Bono and the band as a whole is I think that's why we feel them as so raw, and why it makes so many people cry, because Bono was courageous enough to just put it out there. And I guess, I don't know, that's sort of more of a statement as to why I've always felt this connection with them, because, we all have our own griefs, our own traumas, and to be able to connect like that is on a heart level, even though he has no idea who we are. We still have that connection. I suppose that's it.
Thank you. Yeah. I think, you express our fandom reaction so well, Patricia. I think can you see Ted's got a comment there in the chat. It says, "Have you met any of the band members and possibly discussed these themes with them?"
No, unfortunately not. Still hoping to do so. But no.
I'd say I'm sure it'd be fantastic, but on the other hand, there is a sense too that apropos history and everything, that even writers say different things about their works over time. So the academic study isn't always just to find out what the author says about things, but to actually investigate the evidence, and sometimes the contradictions over time are fascinating. I think the songs have changed for the members too. I've seen some of the comments Bono, for instance, has made about his trips to South America and Ethiopia in the 80s. His view was very different later, looking back at things. He saw himself as a very young man at that point. And there's an interesting irony then when they're presenting these songs live. There are different layers between the experience and innocence, as it were, of the band's experience of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, we'd love to. Yeah, I see you there.
So,
Go
thanks.
ahead.
So my question is about Bono often talks about addictions, and I think those are traumatic for a lot of people. So what about Running to Stand Still? Did you think about that song in the book at all? Or other addictions?
We didn't address Running to Stand Still particularly. The closest I get to addiction is mentioning the song Bad, having to do with Andy Rowan, who witnessed this Dublin Monaghan bombings, and he was traumatized by that, and he went into, was a heroin addict afterwards. So, but we just in a way mention it. It's not one of the songs that we analyze or anything, but addiction is a very important topic, and I was really amazed by how, because in the last chapter we also talk about music as therapy, U2 music, and how Andy Rowan himself in a way was, yeah, you could say saved, not saved, it helped him overcome this addiction when it took many years, but he saw that lyric in a, I don't know, in exhibition or at a museum, and he realized Bono and U2, they wrote it to me, and in a way it helped him. So that's an amazing story. And Steve Stockman has interviewed Andy Rowan, and maybe you've seen that. It was back at the 2018 U2 conference in Belfast, I think it was there. Yeah.
Yes.
And that was really inspiring, and again, hope after so much trauma. So it's definitely something that we could have been looking more closely at, but we didn't address addiction. Wouldn't you agree, Charlie? With
No, yeah, you're quite right. I was actually toying with looking more at it in my chapter, but it didn't pan out. But one of the things that struck me when I was working on Berlin was the fact that there is this film Christiane F, where David Bowie plays a role, which is linked with the Zoo Garden transit stop. So that actually, that location in terms of popular culture is, I've been wondering about that when with Zeropa and everything, whether there actually also is a drug illusion there, if you like. U2 are pretty canny in playing around with these illusions, and certainly with all the glitz and decadence that they were playing around with Achtung Baby, perhaps it's there too. Not just going back to Bad, which is one of my favorite U2 songs, and Running to Stand Still, but perhaps it's also there in Achtung Baby as a kind of subtext. One of the issues they're addressing, albeit a little bit more indirectly there.
Thank you. Any last comments or questions before we do our prize giveaway and wrap up our hour? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
I was just wondering, we've talked quite a bit about how your book looked at trauma, and you talked a bit about Where the Streets Have No Name, and how, of course, it started off with him writing it on the back of the wrapper, and then they're bringing in Africa. But something else that with Where the Streets Had No Name that Bono seemed to explicitly do is seem to almost change that song from a political song to an explicitly spiritual song, especially in live presentation. Like, for example, the last tour, it pretty much was the song of, it was the song after the surrender. And pretty much all through the 2000s, or at least a good amount of it, it was introduced by Amazing Grace in 360 and in Elevation by Explicit Prayer. I was just wondering, have you tied hope explicitly to the bands and especially Bono's spirituality, and specifically Christian spirituality? Because it seems like Streets did that in many of the tours in the 2000s.
Well, Charles, I was thinking maybe it's more of your question with the song, but I really like the link to religious allegory, if that is you're thinking, and how they apply that in so many places. I think to me personally, it means a lot. It gives me hope in my battles as well, to see how they combine these layers and show, I don't know, but that song, The Streets Have No Name, I didn't do any analysis on that, but I've looked for religious allegory in so many other songs, especially on Achtung Baby, Light My Way. It's one of my favorites because you can read it on so many, on different layers, and this light is life-giving light. I would say I depend upon it and find it really inspiring to work. I don't think it's, if I answered your question, maybe Charlie, you can fill in a little bit, but
yeah, so it's a really good question, Megan. I didn't address it much when I was discussing that text because I had some other business, really. I was more interested in the fact that there was a kind of in trauma theory, you're interested in, victim, perpetrator, witness, and it's interesting, U2 built on his trip to Ethiopia and also his trip to South America to be, if you like, a first-hand witness, which is a little bit unique compared to their earlier work on sort of socially committed songs. But Ingunn is really well tuned in throughout her stuff, throughout her chapters to the spiritual and religious side on U2, and she does that a lot better than me. So it is definitely a big factor in her readings, if not of that specific song. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm feeling some frustration myself, basically because about year and a half ago, I was actually diagnosed with PTSD. And I won't go into all the reasons why, except one of them, I'm in chronic pain from a severe car crash. However, I had basically stopped most or all of my photography because I was in a lot of pain, stopped my writing, etc., etc. I'm fascinated with how Bono and those who experience trauma get past that and go further into their art rather than me just stopping, feeling stuck. Is there anything in the book that addresses that, how I can maybe turn that switch, or any similar books that may do that?
I think with in the book, as I said, in the last chapter, we address music as a possible medication, U2 music. And I find it interesting that Bono himself, in a way, has said that on many levels, music has saved him. So this portal of grief, in a way, birthed him, as you mentioned earlier, Patricia, an artist. But I also find it inspiring because sometimes when it's really dark, it's hard to pick up the pen and write, or to take photos or do what you like, because because it's the way it works in a way. But if you get past that, and then I think music might help you to get past that, because what I found out and what a lot of scholars have said about music therapy is that it will help you to rationalize and to get access to your feelings and to process them. And it's also a help to cope. So I would say for myself, I find it really inspiring to use music. Sometimes it's really hard, but then I use play a lot of music when I go to the fitness studio, doing weightlifting, playing U2 loud. And I really depends on the mood, which song to play. But for me, that in a way, and a lot of evidence also in music therapy, there is this evidence that might help. But of course, it's not a quick fix just to play a song and that's and then you're fixed. I wish it was like that.
Yes, yes.
But at least it can help to process things, I think, and I hope you'll get there. And picking up the pen or the photo or what, because
There's always hope.
yeah, that's what we conclude, that there is always hope, no matter which gridlock you're stuck within. At some point, I remember Bono saying when introducing a song, you preach what you need to hear, and that's basically it. Preach what I need to what we need to hear, that there is always hope. Yeah. So one should never give up. That's in a way the glimmer of hope. The conclusion there, that's from a broken place, that's where victory is won, as they wrote in the song We're the People. I love that line. From a broken place, that's where victory is won. And I think deep victory might be won exactly there, even though it doesn't feel like it now.
It takes a tremendous amount of courage.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure why, but it does. It does.
Yeah, I totally understand. And then yeah. It's hard. Yeah.
And having a community too, I think that helps. And that just thank you for sharing that, Patricia, because it brings to my mind maybe how welcomed it would be if we gather again in a different way as U2 fans to share stories about this specific topic and share resources too. But just having a community to discuss this with. We have a common interest already with art and U2, but we have a lot of, I think, common experiences too. So I'm keeping that in mind. So look for something to pop up in a little while. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank you again for joining us. And in the chat, I left, I posted a link to the publisher's website where the book is, and then an image of the book. And I wanted to mention too the amazing, wonderful photograph that Ingunn and Charles were able to secure for the cover. This is a work by Azif, and many of you, I think, know him. He's quite renowned in the world of U2 photography, and it's a beautiful image, and it captures so many, the theme in so many directions so well. I love that image too. The book is quality and hardback and priced for an academic and library market, and I think it's worth every cent that they're asking for it right now. But as the nature is for these types of projects, it's often priced at a much higher point than us fans can part with. So please keep that in mind. But I do suggest this all the time, that if you'd like to have access to the book, please remember that your local library or your university library or a public library likes to hear from its patrons. And if you suggest that they purchase this book, then they will buy it and then you can have access to it, and so many others can have access to it that way as well. So a way to get the book sort of indirectly is to request that somebody else purchase it for you. Yeah, so there's that. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Love from
Thank
United
you,
States
Scott.
to Norway. Yes, it was wonderful to see you all. Be well, take care. I look for you to join us in other U2 community spaces down the road. So, cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Scott, for
Thanks,
organizing.
Scott, for having us. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
For you listening. Yeah.